The rain came down in sheets so thick that Zelda Parker could barely see 3 feet in front of her horse, and when lightning split the sky open like a jagged wound, she knew she had made a terrible mistake leaving Gold Hill that morning. The storm had rolled in from nowhere, transforming the Nevada desert into a treacherous maze of mud and reduced visibility. And now her mare was stumbling over rocks she could not see, whinnying in distress as thunder crashed overhead like cannon fire. Zelda's clothes were soaked through to her skin, her dark hair plastered against her face and neck, and she was shivering so violently that her teeth chattered when she tried to calm the frightened animal beneath her. She had been traveling to visit her cousin in Virginia City, a journey that should have taken less than a day in good weather, but the storm had disoriented her completely. The landscape looked different in the downpour, all the familiar landmarks obscured by curtains of water, and she realized with a sinking feeling in her stomach that she had veered off the main road somewhere back, when visibility had first started to fail. Now she was somewhere in the hills outside Gold Hill, alone and lost, with night beginning to fall despite the fact that it was only late afternoon. The darkness of the storm made everything seem later than it was, more ominous, more dangerous. When she spotted the dark mouth of what appeared to be a mine shaft carved into the hillside ahead, relief flooded through her body like warm water. She did not care who owned it, or whether anyone might object to her taking shelter there. She needed to get out of this rain before she caught her death of cold, and her horse needed rest and protection from the elements. Zelda dismounted on shaking legs, leading the mare carefully toward the entrance, testing each step to make sure the ground was solid beneath her boots. The last thing she needed was to fall and twist an ankle out here where no one would find her. The mine entrance loomed before her like a welcoming cave, and she hurried inside with her horse, grateful for any respite from the storm. The change was immediate and blessed. The roar of the rain became muffled, distant, and the wind no longer tore at her wet clothes. She stood there for a moment just breathing, letting her eyes adjust to the dimness, feeling the tension in her shoulders begin to ease slightly. The mine shaft stretched back into darkness, supported by thick wooden beams that looked old but sturdy enough. She could smell damp earth and something metallic, probably remnants of whatever ore had been extracted from this place. Zelda tied her horse near the entrance where there was still some light and air, then ventured a bit deeper to see if there might be anything useful left behind by the miners. Sometimes abandoned sites had old blankets or tools, things that could help her situation. Her boots squelched with every step, leaving wet footprints on the rocky ground, and she wrapped her arms around herself trying to generate some warmth. She was 22 years old and had lived in Nevada her whole life, but she had never felt quite this foolish or vulnerable before. Her father would be furious when he found out she had traveled alone despite his warnings about the unpredictable weather in early spring of 1882. She found some old crates stacked against one wall and a rusted pickaxe leaning in a corner, but nothing that would help keep her warm. Still, being out of the rain was something, and she told herself the storm would pass soon. It had to. These spring storms were violent but usually brief, and once it cleared she would be able to get her bearings and find her way back to the main road. She just had to wait it out. What Zelda did not know was that this particular mine had been the site of several accidents over the past 2 years. 3 men had died when a tunnel collapsed in 1880, and there had been rumors of unstable passages and pockets of bad air ever since. The mine had been officially closed and marked as dangerous, but the signs had long since fallen down or been carried off, leaving no warning for unwary travelers seeking shelter. She also did not know that the storm had caused some shifting in the already compromised structure, and that even now, as she stood examining the old crates, there were ominous creaking sounds coming from deeper in the shaft. Miles Newman had been tracking the lost woman for the better part of 2 hours, ever since he had spotted her heading in the wrong direction from his vantage point on a ridge above the valley. He was a cowboy by trade, working for the Double Bar Ranch just outside Gold Hill, and he had been checking on some cattle in the higher pastures when the storm rolled in. At 26, he had spent enough time in these hills to know every trail and landmark, even in bad weather, and he had immediately recognized that the lone rider was in trouble. The direction she was heading would take her into rough country, away from any settlements or help. He had tried to catch up with her, but his horse had thrown a shoe on the rocky terrain, and he had been forced to proceed more slowly than he would have liked. Still, he had kept her in sight for a while, and even when he lost visual contact, the tracks were clear enough despite the rain. She was heading straight for the old Silver Point mine, one of the most dangerous spots in the area, and Miles felt his chest tighten with worry. If she went inside seeking shelter, she might never come out. He had to reach her before anything happened. The rain was relentless, soaking through his oilskin coat and the wide-brimmed hat that normally did such a good job keeping him dry. Water ran down his face and dripped from his strong jaw, but he barely noticed. His gray eyes were fixed on the trail ahead, watching for any sign of the woman or her horse. He was a tall man, lean and muscular from years of hard work, with dark brown hair that curled slightly when it got wet. His hands were rough and capable, hands that could rope a steer or gentle a frightened horse with equal skill, and right now they gripped his reins with determined purpose. When he finally spotted the horse tied near the mine entrance, his heart sank. She had gone inside. Of course she had. Anyone would have done the same in this weather, not knowing the danger. Miles dismounted quickly, tying his own horse beside hers, and called out before entering. He did not want to startle her. "Hello, is anyone in there? Miss, if you are in there, you need to come out right now. This mine is not safe." His voice echoed in the shaft, carried back to him in strange, distorted waves. For a moment there was no response, and he felt a spike of fear. Had something already happened? Then he heard movement, footsteps splashing through puddles, and a woman appeared from the shadows, her face pale and confused. "Who are you?" Zelda demanded, trying to sound brave despite the way her voice shook. She could see he was just a man, a cowboy by the look of him, but she was alone and vulnerable, and she had heard too many stories about women who came to bad ends in isolated places. "How did you find me here?" Miles held up both hands in a gesture of peace, trying to look as non-threatening as possible. "My name is Miles Newman. I work at the Double Bar Ranch. I saw you heading this way from up on the ridge, and I knew you were lost. This mine is dangerous, miss. It has been closed for 2 years because the structure is unstable. We need to get you out of here right now." Zelda stared at him, trying to decide if he was telling the truth or trying to trick her somehow. But his face looked honest, all strong features and genuine concern, and there was something in his eyes that made her want to trust him. Still, she hesitated. "The storm is too bad out there. I cannot see anything, and my horse is exhausted. We will leave as soon as it passes, but right now this is the only shelter for Miles. I understand that, but you do not understand what I am telling you." Miles took a careful step closer, his voice urgent but calm. "This mine killed 3 men when part of it collapsed. The whole structure is compromised. That storm out there is dumping a lot of water on these hills, and all that water is seeping into the ground, making everything heavier and more unstable. If another section collapses while you are in here, you will be buried alive. Please, miss, I know I am a stranger, but I am asking you to trust me. We have to leave now." As if to underscore his point, there was a deep groaning sound from somewhere in the darkness behind Zelda, followed by the clatter of falling rocks. Her eyes went wide and all the color drained from her face. She did not need any more convincing. "All right, yes, let us go." They moved quickly toward the entrance, but before they could reach their horses, there was a much louder crack, like a gunshot. And suddenly the roof near the entrance began to cave in. Miles reacted on pure instinct, lunging forward and grabbing Zelda around the waist, pulling her backward as tons of rock and timber came crashing down exactly where she had been standing. The noise was deafening, a roar of destruction that seemed to go on forever, and dust filled the air in choking clouds that made it impossible to see or breathe. When the collapse finally stopped, they were both coughing and gasping, and Miles still had his arms wrapped protectively around Zelda, shielding her body with his own. Slowly, carefully, he released her, and they both looked toward where the entrance had been. It was completely blocked, sealed by a wall of rubble that looked impossibly heavy and immovable. The horses were on the other side, safe from the collapse but separated from them. They were trapped. "No," Zelda whispered, the word barely audible. "No, no, no." She stumbled forward and started trying to pull rocks away from the pile with her bare hands, heedless of the way the sharp edges cut into her palms. "We have to dig out. We have to get out of here." Miles caught her hands gently but firmly, stopping her before she could hurt herself worse. "Wait. Stop. You will just hurt yourself, and we need to think clearly." He could feel her trembling, could see the panic starting to take hold in her eyes, and he knew he had to keep her calm or they would both be in serious trouble. "Listen to me. The people at the ranch know I was up here checking the cattle. When I do not come back, they will come looking for me, and when your people realize you are missing, they will search too. Someone will find the horses outside and know we are in here. We just have to stay calm and wait for help." "But what if more of it collapses?" Zelda's voice was high and tight with fear. "What if the whole thing comes down on top of us before anyone finds us? Then we need to move deeper into the mine, away from the unstable areas near the entrance." Miles was already looking around, trying to assess their options in the dim light that filtered through gaps in the rubble. "Come on. Bring anything useful you found, and let us find a safer spot to wait this out." They moved carefully further into the mine shaft, Miles testing each step and listening for any sounds that might indicate another imminent collapse. He found a spot where the support beams looked more solid and the ceiling seemed stable, a small widened area that had probably been used as a rest station for the miners. It was dark and cold, but it felt safer than being near the entrance. They settled there, sitting on the cold stone floor with their backs against the rock wall, and for a few minutes neither of them spoke. Zelda was trying not to cry. She was not a woman who cried easily, but the combination of cold, fear, and exhaustion was threatening to overwhelm her. She had never been so frightened in her life. Buried alive in a mine shaft was exactly the kind of death that haunted the nightmares of everyone who lived in mining country. She thought of her father and mother back in Gold Hill, how worried they would be when she did not arrive at her cousin's house. She thought of all the things she had wanted to do with her life that she might never get the chance to experience now. "What is your name?" Miles asked softly, breaking the silence. He needed to keep her talking, keep her mind occupied with something other than their predicament. "Zelda," she managed, wrapping her arms around herself. "Zelda Parker. My father owns the general store in Gold Hill. Parker's Mercantile, I know it. I have been in there many times." Miles smiled slightly, trying to project confidence he did not entirely feel. "Your father is a good man, fair prices and always willing to extend credit when the ranch hands are waiting on payday. He will be so angry with me for traveling alone." Zelda laughed, but it came out shaky and wrong. "I thought I knew the way well enough. I have made the trip to Virginia City a dozen times, but that storm came up so fast and I just got turned around somehow. It happens. This country can be confusing even when you think you know it well." Miles shifted slightly, trying to find a more comfortable position on the hard ground. "For what it is worth, you did the right thing seeking shelter. You just had bad luck that you chose this particular place. How were you supposed to know it was dangerous when there were no warnings posted?" They talked for a while, sharing small details about their lives as a way to pass the time and keep their minds off the tons of rocks surrounding them. Zelda learned that Miles had come to Nevada from Missouri when he was 17, following the promise of work and adventure in the West. He had started as a ranch hand and worked his way up to a position of trust and responsibility at the Double Bar. He loved the work, loved the land, loved the freedom of riding across open country with nothing but sky above him. He had no family nearby, his parents having died from fever back in Missouri. But he had found a kind of family among the other ranch hands and the owners who treated him well. Miles learned that Zelda had grown up in Gold Hill, watching the town boom and sometimes bust with the fortunes of the mines. She helped her father run the mercantile, keeping the books and managing inventory, and she had a good head for numbers and business. She read every book she could get her hands on, dreamed of maybe visiting San Francisco, or even going back east someday to see the big cities she had only read about. She was close with her parents and her younger brother, and she had been looking forward to this visit with her cousin who had just had a new baby. As they talked, something unexpected began to happen. The fear that had been clutching at both their hearts began to loosen slightly, replaced by a growing awareness of each other as people rather than just two strangers trapped in a terrible situation. Zelda found herself noticing the way Miles's voice was deep and soothing, the way his presence made her feel a little less afraid. Miles found himself struck by how brave Zelda was being, how she was fighting to stay calm and rational despite her obvious terror. Hours passed in the darkness. They could hear rain still pounding outside, muffled and distant through the wall of rubble. At some point, Zelda started shivering violently again, her wet clothes and the cold of the mine finally catching up with her. Miles noticed immediately and did not hesitate. He moved closer and put his arm around her shoulders, sharing what little body heat he could offer. "Is this all right?" he asked, not wanting to presume or make her uncomfortable. Zelda nodded, too cold to care about propriety. "Thank you," she whispered, and she let herself lean against his solid warmth, grateful beyond words for his presence. If she had been trapped here alone, she thought she might have gone mad with fear by now. But Miles was calm and steady, a rock in the storm of her panic, and she found herself drawing strength from him. They sat like that for a long time, so close that Zelda could hear Miles's heartbeat, steady and strong against her ear where her head rested on his chest. She closed her eyes and tried to pretend they were somewhere safe and warm, somewhere the world was not pressing in on all sides with crushing weight. She tried to imagine what it would be like to know this man under different circumstances, to meet him on a street in town or at a church social, to have the luxury of time to discover if this strange feeling growing in her chest was real or just a product of their dire situation. "Miles," she said after a while, her voice very small, "if we do not make it out of here, I want you to know I am glad I was not alone. You did not have to follow me or try to help me, but you did, and now you are trapped too, and I am so sorry for that, but I am grateful you are here." Miles tightened his arm around her shoulders, his throat suddenly tight with emotion. We are going to make it out, I promise you. And when we do, I am going to make sure you get home safe to your family." He paused, then added more quietly, "And maybe, if you would allow it, I could come call on you sometime. Properly, I mean. Not trapped in a mine, but at your father's store or your home, because I find myself wanting very much to get to know you better, Zelda Parker." Zelda lifted her head to look at him, even though she could barely make out his features in the darkness. Her heart was beating very fast suddenly, and it had nothing to do with fear. "I would like that," she said softly. "I would like that very much." They might have said more, might have explored this fragile new thing forming between them, but suddenly there were sounds from the direction of the collapsed entrance. Voices, muffled but definitely human, and the sound of rocks being moved. Both of them sat up straight, hardly daring to hope. "Hello," Miles shouted, his voice echoing through the shaft. "We are in here. 2 people trapped inside." The sound stopped for a moment, then intensified, and a voice called back, barely audible through the rock. Miles Newman, is that you?" "Yes, Jack, is that you?" "We are trapped about 30 yards inside. The entrance caved in during the storm." "We see that. Hold tight, we are digging you out." It took another 2 hours of careful, painstaking work before they finally broke through. The rescue party from the Double Bar Ranch had brought proper tools and enough men to move the heavy rocks safely without triggering another collapse. When the hole was finally large enough, Miles helped Zelda through first, steadying her as she climbed over the rubble on shaking legs. Then he followed, emerging into the aftermath of the storm to find that night had fallen fully, and the rain had stopped at last. There were 6 men from the ranch, all looking relieved to see Miles alive and well. Jack Cooper, the foreman, clapped him on the shoulder hard enough to nearly knock him over. "We found your horses tied outside and figured you must have gone in before the collapse. Scared us half to death, Newman. What were you thinking?" "I was thinking this lady needed help," Miles said, keeping one hand on Zelda's arm to steady her. She looked pale and exhausted, swaying on her feet. "She got lost in the storm and took shelter, not knowing the mine was dangerous. I got here just in time to warn her, but not quite in time to get us both out before it came down." One of the other ranch hands had brought blankets, and they wrapped both Zelda and Miles in them, then helped them onto horses for the ride back to the ranch. Someone had already sent word to town about the rescue effort, so a rider was dispatched immediately to let the Parker family know their daughter had been found alive and would be home soon. But first, they needed to get warm and dry and make sure neither of them had suffered any serious injuries. The Double Bar Ranch house was warm and welcoming, with lamps glowing in every window. The owner's wife, Mrs. Harrison, took charge of Zelda immediately, ushering her into a spare bedroom and helping her out of her wet clothes into a borrowed nightgown. She prepared a hot bath and hot food, fussing over the young woman like a mother hen. Meanwhile, Miles cleaned up and changed in the bunkhouse, reassuring all the other ranch hands that he was fine, just tired and a bit bruised from their ordeal. When Zelda's father arrived 2 hours later, having ridden out from Gold Hill at a breakneck pace the moment he heard the news, he found his daughter warm and safe and already looking much better. He embraced her fiercely, his eyes wet with tears he did not bother to hide. "Thank God," he kept saying. "Thank God you are all right. When they told us you were missing in the storm, I thought we had lost you." "I am so sorry, Papa," Zelda said, holding on to him tightly. "It was foolish of me to go alone. You were right. Never mind that now. You are safe, that is all that matters." He pulled back to look at her seriously. "They tell me a young man from this ranch saved your life. Miles Newman. Is that true?" "Yes. He tracked me through the storm and tried to warn me the mine was dangerous. When it collapsed, He pulled me out of the way and kept me calm while we waited for rescue. If not for him, I would be dead right now. I owe him everything." Her father nodded slowly, filing this information away. "Then I must thank him properly." He found Miles outside the ranch house, standing on the porch and looking out at the clear night sky that had emerged after the storm. The stars were brilliant, scattered across the darkness like diamonds, and the air smelled clean and fresh. Miles turned when he heard footsteps, straightening when he saw the older man approaching. "Mr. Parker, your daughter is well, I hope?" "Thanks to you, yes." David Parker was a tall man in his 50s with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He studied the young cowboy carefully, taking his measure. "My daughter tells me you risked your life to help her, that you tracked her through the storm and got yourself trapped trying to warn her of danger. That is not something easily repaid." Miles shook his head. "I do not need or expect any repayment, sir. I did what anyone decent would do. Perhaps, but not everyone would have done it." Parker was quiet for a moment, then said, "I understand you are a good man, Newman. The Harrisons speak highly of you, and my daughter clearly thinks well of you. So I want you to know that you are welcome in my home anytime. If you want to come calling on Zelda, you have my permission. Provided your intentions are honorable, of course." Miles felt his heart leap in his chest, but he kept his expression serious and respectful. "They are, sir. Completely honorable. Your daughter is a remarkable woman, and I would very much like the chance to know her better with your blessing." "You have it." Parker offered his hand, and Miles shook it firmly. "Now, I am taking her home to her mother, who is probably wearing a hole in the floor with worry. But you come by the store in a few days, once everyone has had a chance to recover from all this excitement. We will talk more then." 3 days later, Miles rode into Gold Hill and tied his horse outside Parker's mercantile. He had cleaned up carefully, wearing his best shirt and vest, and he had even gotten a haircut from the barber so he would look presentable. His hands were sweaty as he pushed open the door, the bell above it chiming to announce his arrival. The store was busy with afternoon customers, and he saw Zelda behind the counter helping an older woman select fabric from the bolts on display. When she looked up and saw him, her face lit up with a smile that made his chest feel tight. She finished with her customer quickly and came over to where he stood, suddenly feeling awkward and out of place among the barrels of flour and displays of dry goods. "Miles, I was hoping you would come. I told your father I would. How are you feeling? Any lingering effects from our adventure? Just some bruises and a new appreciation for solid ground and open sky." Zelda laughed softly, and the sound was like music. "But I am well, fully recovered. My mother tried to keep me in bed for 2 days, but I was going mad with boredom." They talked for a few minutes, aware of curious eyes watching them from around the store. News of the mine collapse and the dramatic rescue had spread through Gold Hill like wildfire, and everyone knew that Miles Newman had saved David Parker's daughter. There was speculation and gossip, as there always was in a small town, but most of it was favorable. People liked a good romance, especially one that started with such dramatic circumstances. Mr. Parker emerged from the back room and greeted Miles warmly, inviting him to supper that evening at their home. Miles accepted gratefully, and when he left the store a short time later, he felt like he was walking on air. He spent the rest of the afternoon in a daze, barely paying attention to his work at the ranch, counting the hours until he could see Zelda again. Supper at the Parker home was a pleasant affair. Mrs. Parker was a kind woman who reminded Miles a bit of his own mother, and Zelda's younger brother Thomas was a bright 14-year-old who peppered Miles with questions about ranch work and horses, and what it had been like to be trapped in the mine. They ate roast chicken and vegetables from the family garden, and Mrs. Parker's apple pie for dessert, and the whole evening felt warm and welcoming in a way that made Miles realize how much he had been missing having a family. After supper, Mr. Parker suggested that Miles might like to take a walk with Zelda, provided they stayed within view of the house and did not go far. It was a clear evening, still light enough to see clearly, and they walked slowly down the road that led toward the edge of town, talking easily about everything and nothing. "I have thought about you every day since the mine," Zelda admitted, her voice soft. "I keep remembering how calm you were, how you kept me from falling apart with fear. I do not think I ever properly thanked you for that. You do not need to thank me." Miles looked down at her, at the way the evening light caught in her dark hair and made her eyes glow. "I was just glad I could help, and I have been thinking about you too. A lot, actually. I have not been able to get you out of my head." They stopped walking and stood facing each other, the air between them charged with possibility. "Miles, I know this is happening very fast and I know we barely know each other, but I have to be honest with you. What I feel when I am with you, it does not feel like something that happens every day. It feels special, important." "I feel it too," Miles said, reaching out to gently take her hand. "I have met a lot of people in my life, Zelda, but I have never met anyone who made me feel the way you do. Like suddenly, everything makes more sense. Like I have been looking for something without knowing it, and now I have found it." "That is exactly it," Zelda whispered, her fingers tightening around his. "That is exactly how I feel." They stood there for a long moment, just holding hands and looking at each other, both of them aware that something profound was happening between them. They were falling in love, quickly and completely, in the way that sometimes happens when two people meet at exactly the right moment in their lives. It was not just about the dramatic rescue or the shared danger. It was about recognition, about seeing in another person everything you have been hoping to find. Over the following weeks and months, Miles courted Zelda properly. He came to town whenever his work schedule allowed, which was usually twice a week, and they spent their time together talking and walking and discovering all the little details that made each other who they were. He learned that she had a wicked sense of humor and could make him laugh until his sides hurt. She learned that he had a gentle soul beneath his tough cowboy exterior, and that he treated everyone from the ranch owner to the newest hired hand with the same respect and kindness. They went to church socials together and town dances, and everyone in Gold Hill could see how much they cared for each other. David Parker watched his daughter fall in love and was pleased rather than worried. He had taken the time to ask around about Miles Newman, and everything he heard confirmed his initial impression. The young man was hardworking, honest, reliable, and well-respected. He had no vices to speak of, did not drink to excess or gamble or get into fights. He was exactly the kind of man Parker had hoped his daughter might find. In August of 1882, 6 months after the mine collapse that had brought them together, Miles asked David Parker for permission to marry Zelda. The older man gave his blessing without hesitation, and that evening Miles proposed to Zelda in the little garden behind her family's house. He did not have a fancy ring yet. Having spent most of his savings on a piece of land, he hoped to build a house on someday, but he promised her one as soon as he could afford it. Zelda did not care about the ring. She threw her arms around his neck and said yes immediately, laughing and crying at the same time. "I love you so much," she said against his shoulder. "I have loved you since that terrible night in the mine when you held me and made me believe everything would be all right. I will marry you tomorrow if you want." "Let us give your mother time to plan a proper wedding," Miles said, grinning widely. "But not too much time. I do not want to wait any longer than necessary to make you my wife." They were married in October, when the desert heat had broken and the air was crisp and cool. The wedding was held at the little church in Gold Hill, with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Zelda wore a dress that had belonged to her grandmother, altered to fit her perfectly, and she carried wildflowers that Miles had picked for her that morning. He wore a new suit that Mr. Parker had insisted on buying him as a wedding gift, and when he saw Zelda walking down the aisle toward him, his eyes filled with tears of pure happiness. They spoke their vows in clear, strong voices, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their lives. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Miles kissed her with such tenderness that several of the older women in attendance had to dab at their eyes with handkerchiefs. The reception was held at the Parkers' house, with tables of food set up in the yard and music from a fiddle player who donated his services as a wedding gift. Miles and Zelda danced together as the sun set, holding each other close and whispering words meant only for each other. They were both aware of how lucky they were, how easily things could have gone differently. If Miles had not spotted her that day in the storm, if he had not followed her and tried to help, Zelda would have died in that mine collapse. Instead, they had found each other, and now they had a whole lifetime stretching ahead of them filled with possibility. They moved into a small house on the Double Bar Ranch that the Harrisons let them use at a very reasonable rent. It was just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it felt like a palace to both of them. Miles continued working as a ranch hand, saving every penny he could toward buying his own land someday. Zelda helped her father at the store several days a week and took in sewing to earn extra money. They were not rich, but they were happy, and that was worth more than gold to both of them. Their first year of marriage was one of adjustment and discovery, learning how to live together and build a life as partners. They had their disagreements, as all couples do, but they learned how to talk through problems rather than letting resentment build. They supported each other through hard times and celebrated the good times together. When Miles broke his arm in a fall from a horse and could not work for 6 weeks, Zelda took on extra sewing projects and never once complained about the added burden. When Zelda came down with a terrible fever that winter, Miles nursed her day and night until it broke, barely sleeping for 3 days straight. In the spring of 1884, Zelda discovered she was expecting their first child. She told Miles one evening when he came home from work, her eyes shining with joy and a little bit of nervousness. Miles picked her up and spun her around despite her protests that she would get dizzy, then set her down gently and kissed her with such love that she felt like she might burst with happiness. "We are going to have a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" Zelda asked, searching his face. They had talked about wanting children, but talking about it and actually having it happen were 2 different things. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Miles assured her, his hand coming to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "I am over the moon. I am walking on air. I am the luckiest man in Nevada." They prepared for the baby's arrival with excitement and careful planning. Miles built a cradle with his own hands, working on it in the evenings by lamplight, sanding the wood until it was perfectly smooth. Zelda sewed tiny gowns and blankets, marveling at how small everything was. Her mother and the other women in town rallied around her with advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and offers to help when the time came. Their son was born in late November of 1884, after a long and difficult labor that had Miles pacing outside like a caged animal, terrified for his wife's safety. But when the midwife finally emerged and told him he could come in, he found Zelda tired but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked up at him with such love that his vision blurred with tears. "Meet your son," she said softly. "I was thinking we could name him Matthew after my grandfather. Matthew Newman. What do you think?" "I think it is perfect," Miles said, his voice rough with emotion. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny face of his son, at the little fingers curled into fists and the wisps of dark hair. "He is perfect. You are perfect. I cannot believe this is real." "Believe it," Zelda said, smiling despite her exhaustion. "This is our family now. You, me, and Matthew. Everything we went through led us to this moment." As their son grew from an infant into a toddler, Miles saved enough money to finally buy the piece of land he had been eyeing for years. It was 20 acres just outside Gold Hill with good grazing and a small creek running through it. He used all his skills and called in every favor owed to him to build a proper house there, working from dawn until dusk whenever he had time. Other ranch hands came to help on their days off, and David Parker contributed materials from the store at cost. By the summer of 1886, the house was finished, a solid 4-room structure with a porch and a good roof. The day they moved into their own home, Zelda stood in the empty living room and cried happy tears. "Our own house," she kept saying. "Our own land. I can hardly believe it." Miles came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on top of her head. "We have worked hard for this, both of us. You have been such a partner in everything, Zelda. I could not have done any of this without you." They built their life on that land, adding a barn and a small herd of cattle that Miles tended when he was not working at the double bar. It was hard work, exhausting at times, but they thrived on it. They were building something permanent, something that would last beyond their own lives, something to pass down to their children. In 1887, Zelda gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Grace. She had her mother's dark hair and her father's gray eyes, and from the moment she was born, she had both of them wrapped around her tiny finger. Matthew, now nearly 3 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything, though his help was often more hindrance than assistance. But they let him feel important, praising his gentle pats and the way he would bring blankets or toys for the baby. The years passed in a blur of hard work and simple joys. Miles eventually left his position at the Double Bar Ranch to focus full-time on building up their own land. It was a risk, but one they both felt ready to take. They expanded their herd slowly, buying a few more cattle each year when they could afford it. Zelda started selling eggs and butter in town, and her sewing skills were always in demand. Money was often tight, but they never went without the necessities, and they were happier than most people with 10 times their wealth. In 1890, their third child was born, another son they named Daniel. Their little house was getting crowded with 3 children, so Miles added on 2 more rooms, working through the winter whenever weather permitted. The children grew up healthy and strong, helping with chores as soon as they were old enough. Matthew showed an aptitude for working with animals and spent every free moment with the cattle and horses. Grace was bookish like her mother and could read before she turned 5. Daniel was the wild one, always getting into mischief and keeping everyone on their toes. Through all of it, through the busy days and the exhausting nights, through the struggles and the triumphs, Miles and Zelda remained deeply in love. They still looked at each other with the same wonder and affection they had felt in those early days, still found excuses to hold hands or steal kisses when the children were not watching. They had built something real and lasting, a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection, and the shared memory of the terrifying night that had brought them together. On their 10th wedding anniversary in October of 1892, Miles took Zelda back to Gold Hill for a rare evening alone. They left the children with Zelda's parents and went to dinner at the hotel restaurant, then walked through the town as the sun set. Without discussing it, they found themselves heading toward the hills outside town, toward the place where the old Silver Point mine had once been. The entrance was completely sealed now, filled in with concrete after the collapse to prevent anyone else from accidentally wandering in. There was a proper marker there warning of the danger, and the whole area was fenced off. They stood looking at it for a long moment, both of them thinking about that night 10 years ago. "Do you ever wonder what our lives would be like if the storm had not happened?" Zelda asked quietly. "If I had not gotten lost, if you had not followed me, if the mine had not collapsed?" Miles considered this seriously, then shook his head. "No, because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. I think somehow, some way we would have found each other eventually. Maybe not that dramatically, but we were meant to be together. I believe that." "So do I," Zelda said, leaning against his shoulder. "Everything that happened, as terrifying as it was, led us to this, to our family, our home, our life together. I would not change a single thing." They stood there as darkness fell, remembering and grateful, then walked back to town hand in hand. They picked up their children from the Parker house, enduring their excited chatter about everything Grandma and Grandpa had let them do, and drove their wagon home through the cool October night. The stars above them were the same stars that had shone down on that terrible night 10 years ago, but everything else had changed completely. Years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. Matthew grew into a fine young man who took over more and more of the ranch work, allowing Miles to slow down as his body started showing the wear of decades of hard labor. Grace became a teacher, traveling to a nearby town during the week and coming home on weekends. Daniel, true to his wild nature, joined a cattle drive north when he turned 18 and had adventures he would tell stories about for the rest of his life. Miles and Zelda became grandparents when Matthew married a sweet girl from Virginia City and had twin boys in 1905. They were both in their 40s now, their hair showing gray and their faces lined with the marks of time and weather and laughter. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people who had met in a mine shaft during a storm, who had fallen in love while trapped in the darkness, who had built a life together from nothing but determination and devotion. On a spring evening in 1907, they sat together on the porch of their house, watching the sunset paint the Nevada sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard under Matthew's watchful eye, their shouts and laughter carrying on the gentle breeze. Inside the house, Grace was helping her mother prepare supper, and Daniel had just arrived home from another adventure with stories to tell. "We did all right, did we not?" Miles said, taking Zelda's hand in his. It was a question he had asked her many times over the years, always seeking reassurance that she was happy with the life they had built. "We did more than all right," Zelda assured him, squeezing his fingers. "We did wonderfully. Look at everything we have created. Our children, our grandchildren, this land, this life. It is more than I ever dreamed of having." "I love you," Miles said, the words as sincere and heartfelt as the first time he had spoken them. "I have loved you every day since that storm brought us together. I will love you every day for the rest of my life." "And I love you," Zelda replied, her eyes shining with the same emotion that had filled them on their wedding day and the day each of their children were born and every important moment in between. Always and forever. They sat together as the sun dipped below the horizon, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built something beautiful from that chance meeting. Their story had started with fear and danger, with rain and darkness and the very real possibility of death. But it had transformed into something filled with light and love and life, a testament to the power of two people choosing each other and working together to build something that would last. The years that followed continued to be good to them. They watched their children marry and have children of their own. They celebrated holidays and birthdays surrounded by family. They supported each other through the inevitable losses that come with aging, the deaths of parents and old friends, the aches and pains of bodies that had worked hard all their lives. But they faced everything together, just as they had faced that terrifying night in the mine, and they never lost the deep connection that had formed between them in those dark hours. Miles and Zelda Newman lived long, full lives surrounded by the people they loved and the land they had worked so hard to build. They remained in love until the very end, still holding hands even when they were old and gray, still looking at each other with wonder and gratitude for the gift they had been given. Their story became a legend in Gold Hill, the tale of the woman who sought shelter from a storm and the cowboy who tracked her and saved her, and how that terrible night had led to a love that lasted a lifetime. And when they were both gone, their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren remembered them not just as people who had survived something dramatic, but as two people who had loved each other deeply and completely, who had built a family and a legacy that would continue for generations. The mine where they had met was long since forgotten, filled in and overgrown, but the love story that had begun there lived on, passed down through the family as an example of what real love looked like, and a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the very best things that ever happened to us.